Sweden. The country that gave us ABBA and IKEA is probably the last country you would think of when it comes to gangster rap. It's a country known for its stability and affordability, its safety, being rated #1 for quality of life. Sweden has ranked #1 on the Gender Equality Index. They provide universal healthcare and free education to the level that the United States can only dream of. It's a beautiful country with incredible nature and picturesque landscapes, but behind the surface lurks a dangerous underbelly. Because despite all of the positive things that Sweden has gotten right, it's a country with deep-seated problems. For example, the international media has sometimes paid attention to violence occurring in one particular spot of the country. The city of Malmö, in the southern tip of Sweden, which has since the early 2010s made headlines for having an unusually high number of shootings. However, tensions have risen to new highs in the mid-2010s following the so-called European refugee crisis, during which the liberal and desirable state of Sweden received the most asylum applications per capita in Europe. Over time, news and other media, particularly right-leaning ones, have begun publishing alarming reports of so-called no-go zones where even the police couldn't go due to out-of-control gang activity.
Our next guest has just returned from a trip to Europe. He went over there because he wanted to see the migrant crisis firsthand for himself. He went to no-go zones in Sweden. I didn't think there were such places, but there are no-go zones where the police do not go. While he was there, he was jumped by 5 thugs.
I went there, met with the police officers. They said, when we're pursuing a suspect and they cross that threshold, and there's about 30 or 40 of them in Sweden, they will not pursue.
I've just returned from Sweden, where something happened that I never would have imagined in such a wonderful country. My crew and I were attacked. We had things thrown at us, we were punched and kicked, and my cameraman was run over. Unfortunately, Sweden has become a victim of its own humanity. For all its generosity, Sweden is now grappling with communities of disaffected migrants who can't find jobs and have few prospects. There are now 55 declared no-go zones in Sweden, where police have to escort ambulances to ensure their safety. Within minutes of us arriving, a group of young men make it clear we're not wanted and deliberately run down our cameraman.
Whoops! Nej men vad fan!
Hey, 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 hey.
Gå on!
And even they fear their presence will be provocative.
I think it's better if you go in without us, because I think it would be...
Very aggressive.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're young. So we will stay here, and if it is...
That's fine.
You watch us.
Thank you. Okay.
Soon, it seemed that this violence and lawlessness had spread to the entire country, as reports circulated of teenagers roaming the streets of Sweden with rifles, and shootouts had become commonplace. The right-wing politicians in Sweden and elsewhere were quick to take advantage of these news stories to push their hard-on immigration and crime policies. And even globally, right-wing politicians seek to capitalize on the issue, with Donald Trump himself even being particularly outspoken about the problems arising in Sweden.
You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible. I love Sweden. Great country, great people. I love Sweden. But they understand I'm right. The people over there understand I'm right. Take a look at what's happening in Sweden.
To be fair, the more liberal and left-leaning media were equally quick to focus on dismantling these claims and suggesting that the problems had at least been greatly exaggerated, with senior figures in the Swedish police coming out to publicly denounce the existence of so-called no-go zones in the country.
To me, I've been working in the most vulnerable areas in Stockholm. I've been working there for 18 years. We don't have a no-go zone in Stockholm. In my opinion, we don't have a no-go zone in Sweden.
But this isn't a video about the migrant crisis. It's a video about gangsters. And not dissimilar to the migration in the United States that saw Italian Americans establishing the mafia there, in the years that followed the influx of people from all over the world, a new, modern gang culture would emerge in Sweden, arguably with a heavy influence from gangster rap and drill music coming out of Chicago and London. Because as the years went on, reports about increasing violence, and particularly increasing gang-related violence, would unfortunately not go away, but become much more common in Sweden. From shooting high-caliber weapons into rivals' apartments, shootouts in the middle of the street, ghost riding luxury cars for cover, drive-bys out of BMWs with AK-47s, brazen assassinations in packed restaurants, to turf wars between rival gangs that go far beyond shootouts, with gangsters literally blowing up their ops buildings.
It happened in the residential area in Fullerö, north of the city of Uppsala. Investigators say the 25-year-old victim was a neighbour of the targeted premises and had no criminal links. Several other people were injured in 2 other blasts across the country, one in the south and one in a suburb of Stockholm. The attacks are said to be part of a long-running feud between 2 rival gangs in a turf war of drugs and weapons.
Shootouts and bombings have become commonplace in part of the country, leaving the media, public, and politicians asking themselves what can be done to stop the out-of-control gangs from waging war there. Going into the election year of 2022, gang violence became a hot-button issue for voters in Sweden, and even the left-leaning political party in power at the time was admitting that something had gone deeply wrong in the country. But that seemed to be too little, too late for the Swedish public. And now it was the right-wing parties, particularly the far-right party Sweden Democrats, who would end up coming out as a big winner at the elections and becoming the second largest party in Sweden. This enabled them to finally have direct government influence for the first time in the party's history, despite not officially becoming a government party. Now, much of the new government's policy initiatives would centre around tougher immigration policies and introducing harsher sentences for gang members, including those who were underage, with the leader of the far-right party even suggesting that kids as young as 13 should be able to get a life sentence there. But by this time, the problem was deeply entrenched in Swedish culture, and the gangs in Sweden had already formed, being made up of youths who had moved to Sweden years, even decades ago, and in many cases who had even been born in Sweden, representing the 2nd or 3rd generation of immigrants. And of course, as we all know, where there's gangsters struggling, it's only a matter of time before some of those gangsters become gangster rappers and begin using their music to tell the tale of their struggle in the streets. And in recent years, in connection to the rise of gang culture there, the new hot-button issue to emerge in Sweden is the popularity of gangster rap. As over these years of intense gang violence in the streets, emerging from those streets have been numerous gangster rappers, who have become mainstream names in the Swedish music scene, all off the back of their alleged ties to serious criminal gangs. But after the genre's biggest star, rapper Einar, who had allegedly seemingly associated with several different gangs from the country, was first kidnapped by one of these gangs in 2020 and later shot to death in 2021 by unknown assailants in an execution-style attack that was also deemed gang-related. There has been much debate over what role do the rappers play in participating in and fueling the escalating gang culture in Sweden. In one of the more recent examples, in October 2023, Sweden was experiencing a particularly shocking wave of violence, apparently driven by one of the more prominent modern gangs, the Foxtrot network, which the police suspect to be one of the country's leading drug distributors for the moment. They would fall into an all-out war against their enemies for the control of the country's drug trade, as well as going through a bloody internal conflict that has seemingly split the gang into 2 sides. And following a string of deadly shootings and bombings where numerous people had been killed, including a 13-year-old kid and the mother of a gang member. A rapper named 50, affiliated with the gang, would even go on Instagram Live together with one of the gang's alleged leaders, Benzema, who was allegedly hiding from the Swedish police in Iraq and had even rumoured to have been dead, killed by hired assassins. However, this would turn out to be just a trick by Benzema to fool his ops, who he would taunt relentlessly in the video, while toting a gold-plated AK-47 and surrounded by similarly armed goons looking like a real-life character from GTA. Unfortunately for 50 and Benzema, their gangster lifestyle wouldn't last for long, because soon after, 50 and several other Foxtrot affiliates were arrested in Tunisia on gang-related charges. While for Benzema, the end would be even worse, because in January 2024, he would end up being assassinated in the middle of a busy street in Iraq, shot in his car just like he had faked his death only a few months earlier. With Swedish gangster rappers' connections to the criminal underworld being this blatant, it's no surprise then that much like in some other European countries such as the UK, there have even been demands to censor gangster rap artists in the Swedish media. Meanwhile, other gangster rappers have announced that they are ending their music careers, concerned about the influence they're having on the youths and tired of the mental load that comes with participating in this modern-day reality show that gangbanging has become online. So today, we're going to dig deep and look into the shocking untold story of the rise of gangs and learn once and for all exactly how gangster rap turned Sweden upside down.
1,000 miles from south to north, Sweden is rich in scenic variety. From the wide plains of the south,
Sweden's amazing. It's incredible. The people are beautiful. They've got no trash. Their fish even tastes like candy. Like, nothing bad ever happens there.
Riots broke out in the Stockholm suburb.
just across a narrow waterway, is the bustling traffic of the modern city.
You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible.
There's always a friendly policeman to direct visitors to the points of interest.
Sweden. And then a day later, I said, has anybody reported what's going on?
Vi har mycket skjutningar och vi har mycket mord. Jag återkommer till det.
And it turned out that they did not do many of them. Take a look. Take a look at what happened in Sweden.
Or 40 no-go zones in Swedish towns and cities.
Correct.
30 to 40 of them.
That's right.
The country is experiencing some serious security issues.
Since one of the brightest features of Sweden's social program is child welfare. Today, this old kingdom is a modern country. Yes, but in many ways it remains picturesque Sweden.